figures from the repressive apparatus, such as Delcy Rodriguez, would constitute continuity of the system and not a genuine transition. Any political solution must be peaceful, it must be democratic, and led by the Venezuelans, with the responsible assistance of the international community, including the United Nations and regional mechanisms such as the Organization of American States. Panama does not wish and would like to avoid a scenario in which Venezuela's reality simply evolves into a change from one crisis to another, one crisis replacing another. There can be no genuine transition with Madurismo if it remains, or if we have the same power structures preserved under new names. Any arrangement that keeps figures associated with the repressive apparatus at the center of governance would, in practice, constitute continuity of the system and not a real transition. Comparative experience shows that merely nominal transitions tend to prolong conflicts, intensify migratory flows, and perpetuate regional instability to the detriment of international peace and security. Panama will always stand in solidarity with an orderly and democratic transition process, anchored in the popular will already expressed at the polls on July 28, 2024, aimed at restoring democratic institutions through an interim period strictly limited in time, the sole purpose of which is to create the conditions necessary for the effective exercise of the Venezuelan people's right to self-determination. As a country that recovered its democracy and sovereignty, Panama can state clearly that there can be no peace without legitimacy, nor legitimacy without democracy, and that every democracy is ultimately based on respect for the popular will. Mr. President, Panama, due to our commitment to multilateralism and international law, in its capacity as member of the Security Council, will continue to contribute responsibly to collective efforts aimed at preserving peace, strengthening democracy, and supporting legitimate and sustainable solutions anchored in the sovereign will of peoples and respect for international law. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement and now give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to congratulate Somalia on assuming the presidency of the United Nations Security Council in January, and wish you all success. Latvia takes its seat on the Council with a profound sense of honor and responsibility for this role. And let me thank Under-Secretary General Rosemarie DiCarlo for today's briefing on behalf of the Secretary General, and I thank the invited briefers. The Security Council bears primary responsibility for the global efforts to uphold peace, security, and rule of law worldwide. Latvia recalls that under all circumstances, the principles of international law and the UN Charter must be upheld. All efforts now focus on ensuring de-escalation and stability in Venezuela, based on inclusive dialogue and broad societal support. Latvia encourages all relevant actors to prioritize diplomatic efforts and work collectively towards a peaceful, democratic, and sustainable future for Venezuela. Latvia stands in solidarity with the people of Venezuela and their right to freedom and democracy. Rights that were not respected by the Maduro regime during 2024 presidential elections and before, and which remain unmet to this day. The regime of Nicolas Maduro was rooted in mass repression, corruption, organized crime, including drug trafficking, and posed a grave threat to security of the region and the world. It has repeatedly violated the UN Charter and undermined international law, including through open support for Russia's aggression against Ukraine. The Maduro regime does not represent the will of the Venezuelan people and has relied on widespread, systematic repressions of human rights across the country to maintain power. 8 million Venezuelans have been forced to flee the country since 2014. Latvia also remains committed to working jointly together with partners to counter global transnational organized crime networks, including in Latin America and Caribbean. Such criminal activities place the lives of countless people at grave risk, particularly women and children. Addressing these challenges requires sustained cooperation in full respect of international law. Latvia continues to closely monitor the situation in Venezuela and stands prepared to continue working with its partners to support a peaceful, democratic, and just transition that reflects the aspirations of the Venezuelan people. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Latvia for her statement and now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me also thank Undersecretary General Di Carlo for her briefing on behalf of the Secretary General. We also listened carefully to the briefing by Ms. de Freitas and Mr. Sachs. Mr. President, Denmark joins the Secretary General in expressing deep concern over the evolving situation in Venezuela. Since this Council met to discuss the situation 2 weeks ago, we have seen a drastic escalation culminating in a large-scale military operation on January 3rd. At our last meeting, Denmark urged all actors to strictly adhere to international law and to de-escalate tensions and exercise the necessary restraint. Today, we echo the Secretary General in his concern regarding the worrying implications of this military action. Independent of the situation in Venezuela, these developments constitute a dangerous precedent. International law and the UN Charter, as a pillar of the international security architecture, must be respected by all states. Denmark recalls the foundational principle of international law that forbids states from threatening or using force against another state's territorial integrity and political independence. This imperative is enshrined in Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter. Members of the UN Security Council have a special responsibility to uphold these principles. The principles of sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity must be respected. The inviolability of borders is not up for negotiation. These are universal, sacrosanct principles enshrined in international law. They apply everywhere. Mr. President, once again, Denmark calls on all parties to urgently de-escalate tensions that could threaten peace and stability in the region and beyond. International disputes should be settled by peaceful means, as stated in the UN Charter. We further call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and to engage in dialogue and diplomacy. Denmark takes note of official statements from the United States government stating that the military operations are to combat drug trafficking and stem the illicit flow of illegal narcotics. Denmark shares the priority of combating organized crime and drug trafficking, while reiterating that counter-narcotic efforts, as all other efforts, must be conducted in strict accordance with international law, including the fundamental rules and principles of the UN Charter. Mr. President, against this backdrop, Denmark wishes to recall our solidarity with the people of Venezuela. Denmark does not recognize Nicolas Maduro as the legitimate president of Venezuela, following the lack of transparency and integrity in the 2024 presidential elections, which failed to meet basic democratic standards. In Maduro's attempts to cling to power, his authoritarian regime grew increasingly oppressive. His regime bears responsibility for widespread and systematic violations of human rights against his fellow citizens, and he should be held accountable. The victims of the Maduro regime's alleged crimes against humanity have to be heard. The Venezuelan people have a right to democracy and self-determination, exercised through peaceful, inclusive, and credible democratic processes, free from fear of political persecution, intimidation, or repression, and external political interference. This includes the rights of Venezuelans alone to determine their political, economic, and social future, without coercion, pressure, or manipulation by external actors. No state should seek to influence political outcomes in Venezuela through the use or threat of force or through other means inconsistent with international law. Venezuela's future can be decided only by the Venezuelans. We call on all parties and stakeholders to come together for a negotiated and peaceful transition to democratic rule in a process led by and owned by Venezuelans. At this critical and uncertain time, it is imperative that all parties fully respect human rights and international law. Denmark remains committed to supporting Venezuela and the aspirations of its people on its path to lasting political stability. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for her statement and now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I congratulate Somalia on the assumption of the presidency of the Council for the month of January. And I thank our briefers for their remarks. Colleagues, the Venezuelan people have suffered for years. This Council now meets at a pivotal moment for Venezuela's future. Maduro's actions created extreme levels of poverty, violent repression, and failing basic services. His regime's rule precipitated a displacement crisis affecting the whole region. The United Kingdom has long been clear that Maduro's claim to power was fraudulent. To date, Venezuela's National Electoral Council has failed to publish the full results of the July 2024 presidential elections, and independent domestic and international reports also observed significant irregularities and a lack of transparency. President, the United Kingdom wants to see a safe and peaceful transition to a legitimate government that reflects the will of the Venezuelan people. They deserve a government which reflects their vote at the ballot box and delivers a more stable, prosperous future for all Venezuelans. Finally, President, the United Kingdom reaffirms its commitment to international law and the principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. These foundations are essential for maintaining global peace, security, and the rule of law. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. First and foremost, I wish to congratulate you upon your presidency of the Security Council during the month of January. I also wish to thank Madam Rosemary DiCarlo for having conveyed to us the information from the Secretary General of the United Nations on the recent developments which have taken place in Venezuela. Mr. President, France has continued to stand in solidarity with the Venezuelan people as they face the crisis that has been plaguing them for far too many years. Specifically, and in particular, since the summer of 2024, on the 20th of July, 2024, the Venezuelan people exercised their right to vote peacefully in order to shape the future of their country. Their right to choose their leaders, nonetheless, has been stripped away from the people by Nicolas Maduro. Must you recall the facts? The electoral process has been was marred by numerous irregularities, and the final counting of votes was marred by a flagrant lack of transparency. In light of the democratic aspirations of the Venezuelan people, Nicolas Maduro has systematically responded with the repression of dissident voices, of members of the opposition, and of civil society, as well as with numerous arbitrary detentions. France has always expressed itself with clarity about the fact that these practices are unacceptable and that respect for human rights must be upheld. Mr. President, the military operation which has led to the capture of Nicolas Maduro runs counter to the principle of peaceful dispute resolution and runs counter to the principle of non-use of force. The proliferation of violations of the Charter of the United Nations and the violations of international law by states vested with responsibility as permanent members of the Security Council chips away at the very foundation of the international order. Contravening the principles of the Charter, including the principle of respect for independence and the territorial integrity of states, undermines the foundation of the United Nations and weakens international peace and security. France remains faithful and committed to respect for the Charter of the United Nations and of the principle of peaceful dispute resolution. We have an obligation to uphold these principles at all times and in all places. Respect for these principles is indispensable. Mr. President, France wishes to reiterate our commitment to respect for the will of the Venezuelan people. The transition which is currently being opened up for Venezuela needs to be peaceful and democratic and carried out in a manner which respects the choice of the Venezuelan people, a sovereign people. This transition must be led by and for the Venezuelans. France stands ready, alongside states in the region and our partners at the European Union, to uphold dialogue with a view to the restoration of the free democratic expression in Venezuela. We stand ready to support regional stability. This also needs to be the role of the Security Council. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for the statement and now give the floor to the representative of Bahrain.
سيد الرئيس أود بداية
Mr. President, I wish to take this opportunity to congratulate first and foremost the Federal Republic of Somalia on its presidency of the Security Council during this month of January. We wish you every success. We also wish to take this opportunity to thank delegations whose mandate at the Council ended, namely Algeria, Guyana, the Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, as well as Slovenia. We wish to thank them for their significant contributions to the attainment of the goals and the mission of the Council. I also wish to thank Madam Rosemary DiCarlo, Undersecretary General for Political and Peace-Building Affairs, for her valuable briefing related to the latest developments which have taken place at in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and I wish to thank other briefers as well. We appreciate the reaffirmation by His Excellency the Secretary General of the United Nations, reaffirmation of the commitment to the fundamental principles of the Charter of the United Nations, a commitment to the peaceful diplomatic resolution of disputes. The Kingdom of Bahrain supports the call of the Secretary General for all stakeholders in Venezuela to engage in inclusive dialogue which guarantees respect for international law, and this in order to ease tensions, to preserve regional stability, and to avoid any potential adverse repercussions for security and stability in the region. The Kingdom of Bahrain also extends its support for efforts undertaken at the regional and international levels in order to reduce tensions and to enhance diplomatic means in order to provide for international peace and security. The Kingdom stresses the importance of the promotion of international cooperation in order to support all regional and international efforts which are geared towards combating international organized crime, trafficking in drugs, as well as scourges which are related to this. This undermines the stability of societies, undermines achievement of sustainable development. Therefore, these issues need to be dealt with in accordance with international relevant conventions. By way of conclusion, the Kingdom of Bahrain reaffirms our support for regional and international efforts to achieve a political, lasting solution in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. This needs to be achieved through regional cooperation and with respect for national sovereignty. The goal is to provide for security and stability in Venezuela, to avoid risks of conflict and division, to protect civil peace, and to contribute to the preservation of regional security and stability, as well as international peace and security. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Bahrain for the statement and now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me to begin by congratulating Somalia on its assumption of the presidency for this month and assuring you of my delegation's full support and cooperation. We welcome the new members joining the Council. I thank Under-Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo for reading out the remarks of the Secretary General and the valuable briefing. We also take note of the views shared by Mr. Jeffrey Sachs and Ms. Mercedes de Freitas. I welcome the participation of the permanent representative of Venezuela alongside the representatives of other countries from the region and beyond in the meeting. Mr. President, Pakistan views the recent developments in Venezuela with profound concern. In a world already beset by multiple crises, escalating tensions and instability in the Caribbean do not augur well for regional and international peace and security. The UN Charter enjoins us to refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. The UN Charter also binds member states to sovereign equality, non-interference in the internal affairs of others, and settlement of international disputes by peaceful means. Unilateral military action contravenes these sacrosanct principles and the doctrine of sovereign immunity. Such actions set dangerous precedents that risk eroding the foundations of the global legal framework. They also fuel instability, which, as history has shown time and again, can lead to unpredictable and uncontrollable outcomes for years to come. Mr. President, at this critical juncture, the path forward must be one of dialogue and diplomacy. Durable solutions to political differences can only be found through peaceful means, with full respect for the will of the Venezuelan people, free from any external interference. We hope that Latin American and the Caribbean region, as a zone of peace, will remain free from conflict and confrontation and continue its march towards enhanced regional cooperation and improved prosperity for the people. We urge all parties to exercise maximum restraint, de-escalate tensions, pursue peaceful coexistence, refrain from any actions that could exacerbate the volatile situation, and engage in dialogue, including by utilizing the sincere offers of mediation. The good offices of the Secretary General also always remain available for that purpose. Lastly, Mr. President, I affirm Pakistan's commitment to contributing constructively to the discharge of the Security Council's primary responsibility for addressing the threat to international peace and security by diffusing tensions, promoting pacific settlement, and upholding respect for international law and the UN Charter. Peace and stability of Venezuela and the welfare and prosperity of its people, with full ownership, must be the overriding objective of all efforts. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement and now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to congratulate Somalia for assuming the presidency of the Council for the month of January, and I would like to welcome the newly elected members joining the Council. I would also like to thank USG DiCarlo for her briefing on behalf of the Secretary General, as well as Mr. Sachs and Ms. de Freitas for their remarks. Mr. President, Greece is closely monitoring developments in Venezuela. We urge all actors to exercise maximum restraint and to refrain from actions that would deepen the crisis and undermine prospects for peace and stability. Greece reiterates that the Charter of the United Nations and international law, including human rights law, must always be respected. We also recall the obligation of all parties to protect civilians, especially in times of heightened tensions. Greece shares the priority of combating transnational organized crime and drug trafficking, which pose a significant security threat worldwide. We reiterate that these challenges should be addressed through sustained cooperation in full respect of international law. Mr. President, Greece firmly believes that dialogue and diplomacy are the only viable tools for a peaceful transition and a sustainable resolution of the crisis. We join the Secretary General in encouraging all actors in Venezuela to engage in inclusive and meaningful dialogue in full respect of human rights, democratic principles, and the rule of law. We have long been clear that Nicolas Maduro's and illegitimate president's claim to power lacks legitimacy. Greece has not recognized the results of the rigged elections of July 28, 2024, and has always supported initiatives aimed at achieving a democratic solution for Venezuela. We stand firmly with the people of Venezuela in their pursuit of a democratic future, and we express the hope that the recent events will lead to this effect. The voices of all Venezuelans need to be heard, and they deserve governance that reflects their will through peaceful and inclusive processes. In this spirit, we will continue to support efforts aimed at achieving a peaceful, negotiated transition that ensures the will of all Venezuelans is fully respected. Greece stands ready to support all regional and international efforts aimed at the peaceful resolution of the crisis in line with the Charter of the United Nations and international law. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for this statement and now give the floor to the representative of Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Before coming to the substance of our statement today, I think we need to make an institutional clarification. We note with concern that an attempt is being made to present to the Security Council a supposed representative of civil society, a person whose public career trajectory bears the hallmarks of sustained funding from foreign governments and transnational corporations. This has been the case for years, as well as participation in processes of political destabilization and the promotion of institutional breakdown in her own country. The instrumental use of this person to legitimize narratives of confrontation, justify the use of force, or minimize violations of international law does not contribute in any way to the purposes of this Council or to the strengthening of multilateralism. On the contrary, it erodes the credibility of the debates and distorts the Security Council's mandate entrusted with the maintenance of international peace and security. Mr. President, on January 3rd, 2026 is a date of profound historical significance, not only for Venezuela, but for the international system as a whole. On that day, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela was the target of an illegitimate armed attack lacking any legal justification by the government of the United States of America, which included bombing of our territory, the loss of civilian and military lives, the destruction of civilian infrastructure, essential infrastructure, and the kidnapping of the constitutional president of the Republic, Nicolas Maduro Moras, and the First Lady, Cilia Flores. Venezuela comes before this Council today with a deep conviction that international peace can only be sustained if international law is respected without exception, without double standards, and without selective interpretations. The events of January 3rd constitute a flagrant violation of the UN Charter perpetrated by the US government, in particular the violation of the principle of sovereign equality of states, of the absolute prohibition of the use or threat of use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, as enshrined in Article 2, Paragraph 4, and a violation of the duty to settle disputes by peaceful means. Similarly, these acts also seriously violate the Geneva Conventions and its protocols, as indiscriminate attacks were carried out against the civilian population and assets. International human rights law has also been violated, particularly the right to life, personal integrity, and security. Of particular seriousness is the kidnapping of the President of the Republic by the government of the United States of America, which constitutes a direct violation of an essential norm of the international legal order, namely the personal immunity of heads of state in office. This immunity is not an individual privilege. It is an institutional guarantee that protects the sovereignty of states and the stability of the international system. Its disregard not only affects Venezuela, but also sets an extremely dangerous precedent for all states represented in this chamber, regardless of their size, power, or alliances. Mr. President, General Assembly Resolution 3314 clearly defines as an act of aggression the bombing of the territory of one state by the armed forces of another state, as well as the invasion or occupation, even without formal annexation. The events we are denouncing here unequivocally fit this definition. In 2004, the International Court of Justice affirmed that occupation exists when a state exercises effective control, even without formal annexation or the continuous presence of troops. Security Council Resolution 242, for its part, emphasizes that the acquisition of territory by force is inadmissible, while General Assembly Resolution 2625 establishes that the territory of a state shall not be subject to military occupation as a result of the use of force in contravention of the UN Charter.